as people have gotten away from religion and gotten away from going to church and gotten away from even like neighborhood block parties and stuff like that. Everything's isolated, living in an urban environment, talking to people on the other side of a screen, getting in your car, going to the grocery store, coming home, not having that contact that our ancestors thrived on. So yeah, I think getting outside, getting that exercise, but also just having a community that holds you to account is super important.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We have a very special guest today, Matt Thornton, military veteran. You work in the UFC community, some philosophy stuff. We know you through Peter Boghossian, who our audience knows. Tell us about yourself, kind of about your, give us your bio, your history, and what you're doing now.
Sure. I left the military in 1989. I started boxing, had the luck of running into Rickson Gracie and a gentleman named Fabio Santos before the first UFC. Started my own school in 1992 called Straight Blast Gym, or SBG. And then over the last 30 years, we've grown to have locations all across the globe, and famously in Ireland with Connor, and the UK, and across the United States and Canada. And I spent the last 30 years of my life doing that and traveling around and teaching, and focused on helping good people become more dangerous to bad people. Sure,
yeah. So, you grew up in the Bay Area?
I did. I actually grew up in a little town. Well, it's not technically the Bay Area, but a little town called Hollister. It's about 45 minutes from Carmel, kind of in the valley just below San Francisco.
Yeah. Is it north or south of Carmel?
It'd be east, I believe.
East?
Yeah.
Oh, so it's a little bit more inland. Yeah, I used to live in Oakland back in the day. Enjoyed going down to Monterey. It's nice down there. So what'd you do in the military, if you don't mind me asking?
11 Bravo. I was 11 Bravo, and I was in the Berlin Brigade before the wall came down.
What is that? Was it first ID?
No. I can't remember the actual battalion at the time, but Berlin Brigade.
Cool. So what is it? So you get out of the military, it's 89. Things are progressing pretty rapidly vis-a-vis the Cold War ending, right? Like we all kind of knew that was coming to an end. Russia was out of money. They had lost control of most of their satellite states and things like that. And I think it's one of the transition problems a lot of people have. They get out of the military with no purpose or goal or anything like that, which is probably kind of difficult for folks because, you for at least for 4 years, depending on how long you spend in the military, but for at least 3 or 4 years, your entire life is about setting and achieving goals, right? With pretty high consequences for some of them, right? Because if you don't achieve certain goals, you may lose your job there. If you don't achieve others, you may die, right? Or your buddies might die. So it's a pretty high stakes environment. And then we get out and we just see the rat race and like, this is stupid, So, finding purpose outside of that is probably one of the more, like, people ask a lot about military transition these days. If I have any advice on them, like, immediately find a purpose. Even if it's not the one you're going to have for the rest of your life, find some kind of purpose immediately and work from there. That's probably the most important thing. And it looks like you did. So when you first got into the fighting part, was it centered around just doing it because you liked it, or was it immediately centered around the idea of developing some kind of program to transfer to other people so they can become, better at defending themselves, I guess?
Yeah. I was very fortunate, I guess, in a way, depending on how you look at it. I wasn't in during a time of war, the Cold War, but I was in just after Grenada and just before Panama, and they actually sent me home just before the wall came down. So I didn't have a super intense military experience. I enjoyed it, but the reason I joined the military was because I was interested in fighting and what works in fighting. And in my mind, I had this idea of, wanting to be a commando or go in the Army and learn that aspect of it. When I came out of the Army, and while I was in the Army, and the moment I came out, I knew right away what I wanted to pursue was martial arts. So in that sense, I feel like I've been lucky. I know a lot of people need to find a goal. In my case, I've always had this goal for whatever reason of wanting to know what works and what doesn't work in a fight. So when I got out of the military, I looked up Jeet Kune Do instructors, because while I was in the military, I was doing a little boxing. I knew I wanted to box. And from what I read pre UFC days, before MMA, the philosophy of Jeet Kune Do appealed to me because they talked about fighting at all ranges, stand up, clinch, ground. I've been in quite a few fights where I've been put in a headlock or taken down. I knew I needed grappling. I wanted to do that, and I started to train Jeet Kune Do. I trained for a few years, became an instructor, taught for a few years, and long story short, became pretty disillusioned with a lot of what I saw in the community. And right as I was having that moment where I was getting more and more skeptical and cynical about what they were doing, I ran into Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I ran into Fabio and Hickson, and I immediately knew, this is it. This is what I've been looking my whole life for. This is the real deal. And I set about teaching for one reason only. I never thought I'd make a living at it. I never thought I'd run a gym. I set out teaching just so I could have training partners. So I was in Oregon at the time. There's no schools. There's no jiu-jitsu schools or MMA at the time. So that was my reason. And when I started, everybody told me, you're not going to make any money. It's not going to be popular. People don't want to tap out or sweat. They want to collect certificates and click sticks together and do that. And of course, they all turned out to be wrong. And real quickly, my gym started to expand. So in that sense, I really do feel like I was more fortunate than anything else. I had a vision in my mind of what I wanted to do. I had the fortune of running into the people that I needed to meet to be able to help me do it. And everything from there just kind of snowballed.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. The ability to handle yourself in tough and potentially violent situations, and of course protect other people, and even to the point of treating them after some kind of event may have happened, is something that we take pretty seriously because we've seen what that looks like in reality, right? So I think it can be difficult for people who haven't experienced some sort of firsthand violence or mass casualty event to really get their minds around what it means. And it's also, I know you are pretty involved in philosophy these days, and I like to think about these issues because I'll have, when mass shootings happen or something like that, I'll have very frank conversations about things with people because I understand what combat's like. I've been in combat. I've been in a lot of gunfights. The frankness is something that I have a really hard time, I guess, imprinting on people. Like they don't seem to understand think about triage, for example. There's 5 people laid out on the ground, and you have to decide who's already dead, who's going to die, and there's nothing you can do about it, who's treatable, and in what order, right? There's a lot going on there. And, you're not going to be able to simulate a situation like that. Like you can certainly do training around stuff like that, but to simulate the stress and anxiety around that's why I think things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specifically is really important, because it doesn't really matter if you're in a safe environment or whatever. When another grown adult is trying to fucking choke you out, your animalistic instincts kick in. You know what I mean? I think it's even like going to the gun range or something like that doesn't compare to getting on the mat with somebody and fighting for your life. I think it's a really important, not just from, a physical exercise or even the ability to handle yourself in that kind of situation, but also simulating an environment where you're afraid for your life, but there's really low, if any, risk. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I wonder if, people live extremely busy lives these days. I mean, some of it is just superfluous nonsense that we do that we don't need to, but it can be challenging to find time to really commit to multiple types of fitness. What I mean is like going to the gym 2-3.
For some reason, we've got jets going over my head today. That doesn't usually happen. Looks like it's gone now.
Oh, yeah, that's good. What I mean when I say committing to multiple types of fitness, going to the gym 2, 3, 4 times a week, and then maybe some kind of fighting or shooting class 1 or 2 times a week. That's tough, man. For somebody that's working 50, 60 hours, they got wife and kids or whatever. That it's not easy to make all that happen, but I do think it's important for all the reasons, that people can find in your work and all the reasons that we're discussing right now. What advice do you have for people like that are trying to find ways to fit it in?
Yeah. One thing I've tried to explain to people over the years, my connection with philosophy and the martial arts comes in skepticism and teaching people what works and what doesn't work, and being able to determine, what works and what doesn't work, because there's a lot of bullshit, as I'm sure you know, in martial arts. And the thing I've tried to explain to people over the years is all the martial arts that work, what I would call a functional martial art, have one thing in common, and that's they're combat sports. So if we're talking about judo, Muay Thai, boxing, MMA, those arts that are incorporated in MMA are all sports. And the reason they're all sports is because sports has that opponent process. You're dealing with an alive opponent, and because you care about the results, you go to what we always go to when we care about results, some form of meritocratic competition. And so what I always encourage people to do when they're focused primarily on self-preservation, and that's their reason for getting in martial arts, is find a combat sports gym. I mean, I personally obviously love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but wrestling, judo, anything like that you can do a couple days a week that's sustainable is going to give you that feeling of dealing with, another live human being who's actually fully resisting you. And you get used to that over and over again. And that's a great thing. It's great for all the reasons you mentioned. It's great in terms of taking care of your body. It's great in terms of what it teaches you about hand-to-hand combat and what you do and don't know. And it heals people. I mean, it keeps people healthy mentally and physically. So
there's another one. I think they may be spying on you today.
Scrambled here for some reason. But it's such an important thing that what I would tell people is, first of all, find a combat sports gym. And then second, prioritize it. Everybody, I have 5 kids. I have multiple companies. I work full time. My wife doesn't work. We homeschool. I understand how hard it is to find time to do things, but you have to have enough time that you can take care of yourself. Otherwise, everything else is going to fall apart. And so for me and for my wife and for my kids, having a few hours a week that I have set aside dedicated to going into my gym and training and rolling is just absolute necessary for my mental health and for my physical well-being. So people, and in most cases, no matter how busy somebody is, there's a rare exception, but in most cases, no matter how busy somebody is, you can prioritize 4 or 5 hours out of your week to get into the gym and take care of your body. You can get up earlier, you can do whatever you need to do to make sure you have that time. But I think everybody, once they do that and they start to experience it, and a month goes by, 2 months goes by, repeating that habit and getting in there and working with a live opponent, with that opponent process on the mat, they're going to be so much happier. You're going to feel happier, feel healthier, feel more confident, and you're not going to want to quit at that point. So I would tell everybody out there to find a school, any kind of functional martial art, which is going to be a combat sport. Set aside a few weeks for yourself and as just maintenance of your human body, and get in there and do it. And I think real quickly they'll find they're gonna enjoy it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can. There's 2 things I want to touch on. The first one is the healing part you talked about. I've had conversations with Tim Kennedy quite a bit about this, about the women's protector courses that he does. And, a lot of it is just, a lot of the students are women who haven't necessarily used weapons before, and their husbands want them to carry a gun. And before they do that, they want them to go get some experience, whether from some people, Delta operators and Rangers and shit that know what they're talking about. That's a big part of it. But another big part of it are people, women who have been victims of assault or sexual assault, right? And he's told me, I mean, I know we've had a dozen conversations about this, about this, you can almost tell who it is in the class because they're kind of mousy and anxious and stuff. And then they'll get into their first couple of rolls and have some pressure applied to them, and you'll just see them tears streaming down their face because they're reliving that moment. You know what I mean? And then the same story every single time. By the end of the class, now you've got a powerful and prepared person who isn't crying anymore, right? It's one thing to be prepared for shit, and it's another thing to change someone's life so there isn't always this, albatross, this anxious albatross hanging around their neck. Every single breath they take is heavy, you know what I mean? And you've helped them relieve that. Well, he's helped them quite a bit, but in reality, they helped themselves by showing up in the first place, right?
Absolutely. That's the thing I love most about my job. And I can't even express to you how many times I've seen that happen all around the world. Women that come from abusive relationships or have had previous experiences, been raped and things like that, kids that have been abused. I've seen kids that were autistic and would come in that couldn't even make eye contact or have a conversation with somebody, and a year later they're a changed person. So that give and take of that physical relationship you have with another body on the mat is super important, and the lessons that we draw from that are vast, and it allows people to open up and to be able to experience a better and better connection to other humans just through that process, just through wrestling, getting on the mat, touching, feeling somebody holding you down, feeling that resistance, that intimacy of closeness with another human body. It heals people. I don't know how else to say it. And it changes people. And that's probably the single best thing about my job.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned autism. So most communication, 85 to 95%, depending on which study you believe, is nonverbal, right? And it's the way you're describing this, it sounds like it's almost a supplement to talk therapy, right? I mean, you're going to get what you get out of talk therapy, but there are things that you can say with your body and through struggle that you can't say, that you can't verbalize necessarily. That's probably a pretty important thing for these people.
It's that exposure to human touch. And, that makes a huge difference in people's lives. I'm not sure. I'm sure there are other activities that are also good, but I've never seen anything personally that matches jiu-jitsu, just because grappling and fighting in that way with another human is so primal and so it's not like hitting focus mitts or practicing a martial art where there's this distance. It really is about that physical connection. I don't think there's any way to circumvent that process. And once people go through it and they start to be, first they're going to be very uncomfortable. They might cry, they might be upset, they might have to step off the mat. Sometimes I have to be careful keeping an eye on people. If I can see that they're going to have a panic attack when they're stuck underneath, for example, I've seen that happen. And then you kind of, work them into it slowly, but over time, and it doesn't take a long time, a month, 2 months, 3 months, you have a changed person who's going to be underneath another human body who's crushing them and no longer have a panic attack. And that's a pretty powerful thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things I think we've lost in the culture of safetyism, two major things. One is comfort and discomfort, right? Which I think is a really important part of life, because most of life is going to be uncomfortable. And if you're uncomfortable with that, life's going to be rough. You know what I mean? It's not going to be a fucking easy time to get the stuff done that you need to get done if the specter of the discomfort is always hanging over you, no matter what you're doing. I mean, you're never going to be able to perform at your best like that. And the other thing is low-level conflict resolution and being able to be comfortable in that situation enough that you make good, rational decisions that take not just yourself but other people into account. Because that's how, like, the way that any evolutionarily designed mind works is we're reasonable up until a point, until we feel like we're threatened, and then we're a dog in a corner, right? I mean, that's just how it works. There's a preternatural urge to defend yourself, and it'll overcome reason, because reason can cause hesitation, which can get you killed. We know that. But if we lose our ability to persist through discomfort in a reasonable way, now we've really lost something. You know what I mean? Like, we've lost the ability to stop really horrible things from happening that don't necessarily need to happen. It's escalation. You know what I mean? It goes back and forth. And I think it's why I encourage people, especially if you have younger kids, get them into, like my co-host on the other show on Drake Bros. his kid's 8 years old, I think. He's in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Like, it's the best time. Even if they don't do it as an adult, having them do that when they're 6 to 12 years old, that's a really important growth period for kids.
Like I said, I have 5 kids, and for my girls, I have 2 daughters and my son, and they're now 9 and 12. For them, going to jiu-jitsu is mandatory. I view it the same way as learning how to swim. It's just one of those basic skills. Fortunately, they love it. We have great instructors. They enjoy it, and I think now they'll stick with it. But even if they didn't want to go, I feel it's so important that as soon as they turn 6, 7, they're on the mat. They're going to go and they're going to show up to class. My wife's from Iceland, and she compared it to everybody in Iceland having to learn how to swim, obviously, because you're on an island. And I think of it exactly the same way. It's just an essential, fundamental skill I want every little girl and boy to have, and they get so much from it. It's unbelievable. So yeah, absolutely, get your kids in there.
The other thing that I want to discuss from your previous comment was discipline. You didn't say it specifically, but it's kind of what you were hinting at by building a schedule around yourself. So people think there are 2 types of folks, a disciplined person and an undisciplined person. And that's very reductive, right? So folks think that discipline is training yourself to always do the right thing. And there's certainly an element of that. You know what I mean? Like, you do want to create good habits and stuff like that. But discipline is also understanding what your weaknesses are. You know what I mean? So, if you have issues with late night snacks, do yourself a favor and don't buy them. You know what I mean? Like, you can cut that shit off before it even gets down to the point where that you can train yourself to make good decisions when you're under duress. That's a good thing to do, but you can also mitigate duress upstream. You know what I mean? It seems like a good idea. If you have a problem making it to the gym or to the mat on a regular basis, then make yourself a hard schedule, right? And find a buddy who's on that same schedule. These are things you can do that seem like, well, if you were disciplined, you wouldn't have to do that. No, that is discipline, right? It's building guardrails for yourself to make sure you do these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. On one hand, I've never had a day in my entire life where I thought to myself, man, I really don't feel like going into the gym to train today. It's never happened to me. So I just have the great fortune of loving what I do. So being on the mat and rolling or training jiu-jitsu, one of my all-time favorite things to do. So I've never felt that I needed to work hard to get there and do it. But I do have to discipline myself when it comes to just basic fundamental conditioning, because it's not something I really enjoy. And it's really just about the creation of habits. Once people get in the habit of doing it 2, 3, 4 weeks, it starts to become something regular, and you start to pick it up and you start to enjoy it because you're starting to reap the benefits from it. But, I always encourage people to do both. You want to develop habits that are going to help you in your life, doing the things that are healthy and important, like eating well and exercising and things like that. But you also want to find what you love to do. Like, everybody's different. Find that thing that you love where it doesn't require discipline, where you think, man, you never have to tell yourself you're looking forward, you have to work hard to do it. You just want to go do it. And I think that's very important too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, those are just 2 birds, or 2 wings on the same bird, I think. I don't think you can get away from one or the other. So one of the things you mentioned it in your intro, but one of the things that you've focused on for a career is helping people get prepared to defend themselves and others, right? Can you go, like, what is it that motivates you to do that? What I guess maybe what shortcomings in society do you see that precipitate the need for that sort of thing?
Well, for whatever reason, I had that fundamental question for as long as I can remember when I was a young kid about what works and what doesn't work in a fight. So that pushed me, and it's always moved me to discover what works in hand-to-hand combat. And as I started to teach and I started to do this for a living, one of the things I would constantly hear is, well, this is for sport and this is for street. And then they would offer some dead pattern, some sclerotic pattern for street defense. And I would want to explain to people that, listen, circumstances will dictate your tactics, and plans change on contact. And, of course, a fight in a parking lot with a couple of people is different from a fight in the gym. Having said that, there's no special mount escape that you use when you're in a parking lot that you don't use in the gym, or headlock escape for that situation. Those core skills you develop in stand-up, clinch, and ground in the gym translate everywhere. They translate into street MMA. If you're working on fundamentals, it'll be gi, no gi, MMA, self-defense. It's going to be essentially the same building blocks, same delivery system. So I try and get that across to people. And then the next thing you would hear often is, well, we're only focused on the physical aspect of it. All of the pre-fight things, being able to notice what's going on around you and things like that, are not taught, which is also not true. So it's one of the reasons I wrote the book. And when I have people really prioritize on self-defense, I give them one acronym, which is MIND, and that's maturity, intelligence, noticing what's going on around you, and then the 3 Ds of distance management, determination, and deterrence. And they're in order of priority. So, I think anybody that looks at the data, crime data, violent crime in the United States or around the world, but particularly here, if you take an honest look at that data, you're going to see right away that the biggest problem we have is issues of maturity. A good percentage of what we see when the shootings and homicides, for example, fatherless young boys murdering fatherless young boys over petty, stupid issues related to status. It's not about money. It's not about like big drug money or anything like that. It's 13 to 25 murdering each other over dumb, small, petty issues. No fathers anywhere to be found. And that's an issue of maturity, of self-awareness, impulse control, and empathy, and the lack thereof. And so everything begins in my mind, when we talk about violence, begins with maturity. Being a mature person, doing mature things in mature places with mature people. And once you have that, you immediately set yourself into a different category. And the odds of you, even running into having to engage in a violent conflict shoot way down. And then after we set that up and we make sure that we've got that right, then it's a question of intelligence, which is using your mind to prioritize, real threats as opposed to fake threats. You have guys that are constantly worried about a terrorist attack, but they're 150 pounds overweight, drinking a 32-ounce cup of soda. Those people aren't actually interested in self-preservation. They're worried about humiliation. And so they want to be good. They want to be in a situation where they can prevent somebody else from humiliating them. But the extension of their life isn't really the true motive. Otherwise, of course, they would prioritize and take care of the things that most of us are actually going to die from. And in intelligence, there's also, being educated to a certain extent about pre-encounter incident, things that you can look for, and knowing when things just aren't right, when things just don't look right, being able to recognize that, and above all else, honoring your primal instincts when they go off and they tell you, hey, something is not right here, and not letting your mind override that because you want to be a nice person, or you don't want to believe this is true, or you're frightened, whatever it is. And finally, we get down to deterrence, determination, and distance management. And once it becomes physical, as we both know, whether we're talking about a military encounter or a fight in the cage in the UFC, self-defense situation, everything when we talk about physical encounters is about managing distance, managing space. And if you can control the space between you and your opponent, you can control the fight. And so, once it gets physical, that's where we put our emphasis. But long before that, you have in almost every case, a long series of things that people either ignored or didn't pay attention to that led up to that. And Gavin DeBecker talked really well about that, The Gift of Fear.
Yeah,
and
The Gift of Fear is a good book.
Acknowledge those instincts, recognize those instincts, understand why they're going off, listening to them, and then being able to make distance. All those things happen before we get to the physical encounter.
Yeah, it seems like we've changed the way that we view natural stimulus. So pain used to be an indicator that something was wrong, and then you look upstream and try to find out what the symptom is telling you. And then we got into opiates and just put a Band-Aid on that so we could keep, I guess, being productive little workers. I don't know what maybe that's just the result, but for all the homeopathic and naturalistic bullshit that you see in whatever alternative medicine is, and I'll address that. Something either works and it is medicine, or it does not work and it's bullshit. There's no such thing as alternative medicine. But for all the naturalistic stuff you see, man, I don't see a whole lot of people just listening to what their brain is telling them. Like nature's had I don't know. Let's be liberal and say 250,000 years to program you to be able to, like, your brain is a very complicated machine that perceives threats and benefits. That's what it is, right? Benefits insofar as staying alive and then passing your genes as far downstream as possible, and threats as in keeping your family, community, whatever, alive. So if you see something, if something's given, like making your spider sense go off, I don't care if you're trained or not. Like, it doesn't matter what level of training you've had in your life. Your DNA has been training for this forever, so far as you're concerned, right? Like, it's certainly a lot older than any of us are. But we've seemed to have, for some reason, and the reason I brought up medicine is because this is not, the way we function in society isn't the only place this is happening. Like, it's happened in pretty much everything we do. We continuously unsolve problems that we've solved 2,000 years ago when it comes to like Greek government and things like that. Pay attention. Like, situational awareness is about knowing what's going on around you, but it's also about listening to the cues. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? It doesn't mean you have to sprint away every time you feel a tingle in the back of your head. But you should definitely look around. Like, if something feels off to you, look around. Look at people's hands. Is there something in their hands? Look at what they're wearing. Is it hot as fuck, but they're wearing like bulky clothing? Why? Start asking questions. Are they wearing the proper footwear, for example? These are really important things that require no training at all. You can read this on an infographic and then go out in public and practice. You know what I mean? Anytime you want. So. What do you think it is?
I think it's a product of our success in many ways. I mean, exactly as you just said, there are things that we can teach people to look for, and we certainly do that. But what I try and get across to people is, as Richard Dawkins has pointed out many times, every single one of us, you, me, everybody listening to us, is a product of a consistent chain of success. Every one of your ancestors lived long enough to procreate all the way down the line, which in comparison to the vast majority of living things out there is amazing. And you, me, we are the product of that. And ingrained inside you, that's why I call those things primal instincts. Ingrained inside you, you have all these instincts to be aware of danger, to be aware of an agent that is up to no good that's around you, to be aware of situations that are not in your interest. And as long as people understand that and they start to trust that and they start to listen to that, that's 90% of it. There are other things we can show people, but that's 90% of it. That's innate. And giving people the confidence to trust their own instincts and that kind of thing is one of the biggest things we try and do when we're talking to people about learning how to defend themselves. As far as why we've gotten away from those, I think because we live in a society where most people can go to the grocery store to get their meat. There's a whole lot of people who are really divorced from violence and may have never been in a violent encounter, may have never even seen a violent encounter except on TV or in the movies. And for them, the things that our ancestors had to go through seem far removed. Those instincts are still in them, but they may not understand that. They may not trust that. And in a way, obviously we have a large uptick in violence after George Floyd, and the biggest 30% jump, the biggest jump that the United States has ever seen last year in terms of homicides. But long term, going back generations, violence has been on a fairly steady decline every century. And the further back we go, the more violent we were. And along with that decline, and also living in urban environments, comes a kind of separation from the instincts that our ancestors had and our ancestors understood. And so getting people back in touch with that is really important. And just to bring it full circle, physically grappling with another human body is one of those things that can help you get back in touch with those instincts and that innate intelligence that our ancestors developed and knew full well.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, it's like the hands-on experience of, I know how, in my head, I know how I think people react under certain types of pressure. And I know how what might react under certain types of pressure, but it's one thing to know, and it's another thing to know, right? You know what I mean? We feel, you're 100% right about society and culture. We feel like, because of, you know, the rapid decline of violence, because of the relative comfort of our lives, that we're in some kind of maybe post-violent society or something to that degree. But that's the thing about safety. You know, it's just like liberty, as Reagan said back in the day. It's always only one generation from extinction, you know. And it seems almost like societally suicidal to this safetyism movement, where, you know, we don't want people to experience low-level risk because things have become so safe that any incident, you know, relative to the overall safety, seems large. We have no tolerance for that stuff. It's fatalistic, but it's also really stupid. I mean, like, if you thought about that from the point of view of an athlete, like, I've gotten really good at shooting free throws. I'm just not going to practice that anymore. You know what I mean? Because why should I? Well, that's fucking stupid. Nobody thinks that way in any other realm other than just how you live your day-to-day life, which is the most important part of your entire life, like your day-to-day habits.
Yeah, no, we see it everywhere. And there is some kind of suicidal tendency running through Western culture right now. That's a broader topic. I don't want to go on a tangent, but that's definitely occurring. You know, I live in Portland, and I walk around my neighborhood walking my dogs or with my kids, and I can see all kinds of yard signs out there. And one of the things people say it frequently here in Portland is silence is violence, which I've always found kind of funny because it's so stupid, because obviously silence is the opposite of violence. But we've got a generation of people now who've come out of college or who've been raised in an environment like we have here in Portland, who view any kind of disagreement, even having their basic ideas about politics, for example, or the nature of the world, even having those ideas challenged, they view as a form of violence. And they're so disassociated from real violence, actual physical violence, that they're living in kind of a fantasy world, and in many ways, I think, completely incapable of potentially handling the future situation should things get bad. And that's not a good thing for our society. It's not a good thing for our kids. I think that has a lot to do with the public school system and what's going on in academia. But it's going to continue. I think that this long-term trend of reduction in violence will continue in all likelihood. And so I think it's important to have these avenues and places where people can go back, young people and other people can go back and get back in touch with all those things that may have been forgotten, that our ancestors understood.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's super important to, I think, for not just for, you know, the obvious reasons, which is self-defense and physical health and things like that, but also for mental health. I think it's super important for people to, you know, experiencing long-term doubt and anxiety has a real and lasting effect on your psychology. Not feeling prepared for things. I mean, just imagine this. You don't know, and this is something that'll pop into your mind a lot because this is the way the human brain works, but you don't know if you're going to be able to pay your bills next month, for example. Like now go try to fucking get some sleep. It's tough for people, right? And that's easy to imagine because it's something that's in the prefrontal cortex. We're thinking about that actively all the time. But in the back of your mind, all this pattern recognition and threat and benefit association that's going on in the back of your brain all the time is when you experience something in public or when there's tumult in society or politics or something like that, that also adds quite a bit of stress and anxiety to your life, whether you recognize it immediately or not. And being informed and educated and prepared, whether it's to, defend yourself physically or provide for yourself, like hunting, fishing, whatever it is, right? Just the act of preparing for that will not only make you prepared for it, but it also has a very real effect on your psychology. You know what I mean? And it's, psychology is contagious. So when we, like, this societal decay that we talk about all the time, a big part of it is that and I talk about this all the time. The reason I named the show Citizen is because the definition of a citizen is a person in a state who is conferred certain rights and responsibilities, both of those things. We talk about our rights a lot. We don't spend a whole lot of time talking about our responsibilities. And that is true for being a better citizen. In my estimation, you're either going to be a citizen who takes into account your rights and also, more importantly, your responsibilities, or you're going to be a subject, right? It's going to be one of those two things. But that's true also in your own life. You know what I mean? Like, if you're unprepared, if you're unhealthy, you're going to suffer the consequences of that stuff. And it's going to permeate through your entire family. It's going to permeate through all your friends, your coworkers, all this stuff. And it's what we mean when we say leader. You know what I mean? You don't have to be the CEO of the company. You don't even have to be a manager of your company. You don't even have to work at a company. But people very frequently are afraid and confused, don't know what to do. And when they see somebody who confidently does things, that inspires them to do it as well. That's what real leadership is. Leadership's not yelling or fucking telling people what to do. It's showing people what to do and doing it in your own life as well. And, I think this stuff that you do is a really important part of that, because it gives people a foundation that's very real. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I agree. Going back to the part about stress, the two biggest things that help me with stress and that I've seen help people, number one is being in the gym and just grappling. After an hour of rolling in the gym, 90% of whatever anxiety I had previous is gone, and being outside, getting back outside. But the other piece about a place like my gym or any gym that you go to and you become part of is the community, because that's the other missing piece that's happening to people is they're sitting behind glass screens. You had the ridiculous, almost criminal way we handled COVID. They're isolated from other people. They're not talking to other human beings, not even, let alone physical contact. They're not even having one-on-one intimate communication with people. And we need community. We're social primates. We need the closeness and other people that we care about, who care about us, who hold us to a particular standard, that we hold to a particular standard that we can grow and evolve with. In the gym, and at least in my gym and other gyms that I've seen, it becomes a hub for that, and it becomes, and the great thing about it too, is it goes back to that meritocratic system. You'll have a doctor rolling on the mat with a construction worker, rolling on the mat with a college student. All of them would probably have very little contact with each other outside the gym, but in the gym, they're all equals and sharing in a shared goal, training together, battling with each other and helping each other grow. And it becomes a community. People go there 2 or 3 days a week. And anytime you go someplace where there's lots of people 2 or 3 days a week and you struggle with them, you're going to develop the benefit that also comes with having that physical community. And I think that's super important, is people have gotten away from religion and gotten away from going to church and gotten away from even like neighborhood block parties and stuff like that. Everything's isolated, living in an urban environment, talking to people on the other side of a screen, getting in your car, going to the grocery store, coming home, not having that contact that our ancestors thrived on. So yeah, I think getting outside, getting that exercise, but also just having a community that holds you to account is super important. And anybody that's out there that's listening to this, that's feeling isolated, get out there and find a place where you can experience that around a group of people that you like and want to be around, because it's one of the best things you can possibly do for your mental health and for your growth as a person.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's human beings are like matter in the universe, and community is our gravity. It's, no matter what circumstances or what time period or what geographical location human beings have been located over the last, 250,000 years or so, or our ancestors have been over the last 250,000 years, we have very not even frequently, pretty much always gravitated towards one another to build communities for a host of reasons, right? And it's what you said. I mean, we're the winners in the evolutionary lottery, I guess, because we have the benefit of being downstream from people who made not it's reductive to say they made the right decisions. They just made decisions that make the most sense for this type of environment. So if we look back, it's I understand the need to progress. We can progress in the way that we administer our principles. We can progress in making sure that they're available for everybody. We can progress technologically and scientifically. But the general core concepts of what it means to be a human being in a community have not changed in any way, right? It's the reason that they've been so ubiquitous throughout human history is because that's what works. And we know that because that's how evolution works, right? That's how natural selection works. I 100% agree with you on the isolation thing. And I think one of the principles of this show that I wrote kind of in that same vein is I will not allow those less fortunate or incapable of defending themselves to be harmed or taken advantage of in my country. So what it does, one of the other principles is I'll do something every day to help my country, my countrymen, or all men. And those two things specifically to me are about re-engaging in society. Like if you have the mental awareness and acuity to recognize these things for what they are, you are a leader by definition. You know what I mean? Just by recognizing what's happening, it is now incumbent upon you, and I would say a moral requirement of you to be a leader in your community, whatever that means. And again, the community aspect of it is really important. So how do you wave to your neighbors? That's one thing, right? But then you see your neighbors trying to lift something heavy into the back of their truck, then you go help them, right? That's what it really means. You can take it back to the middle of the 19th century where there's a lot of pioneering going on. We're developing new territories, a lot of predatory behavior, no formal police system in the United States at that point. There are locally elected sheriffs. There's a lot of private contractors like the Pinkertons and shit like that. But as far as like a city police or a county sheriff's department with deputies and shit, that didn't exist. So some jackass shows up to your area and maybe there's 10 or 15 dudes that live in a 50 square mile area and they steal somebody's horse. Well, every dude that's an adult, which back then meant like 14 or higher, grabs their horse, grabs their gun, and goes out and finds this motherfucker, right? Because that's the rule of society. It is that even if we have something else to do, I'm busy, I've got to take my kids somewhere, I got to do this, I got to do X, Y, Z, I'm not feeling good today. Fuck that. It is your moral responsibility to be there for the people around you, not just the people with the same last name that you have or the people that you go to football games with, everybody around you. And you can't do that if you're not prepared. You know what I mean? Like the best intentions, that's great. It looks great on paper, but that's virtue signaling. That's putting a Ukrainian flag in your Twitter profile. Being actually ready, both mentally and physically, to help other people. That is one of the core, in my opinion, that's one of the foundational elements of being a good human being, but certainly in being a good citizen.
I love that. That's a great mission statement. I couldn't agree more with everything you said there. One thing that concerns me as well is when in my dad's generation, when he went to college and came home, what you would typically do is if you went to college, you would go to college and then you would come back to the small town you were born in. So for example, I was born in Hollister, California. He would go to State University or wherever, come back to Hollister, marry a local girl there, buy a house, live on a block, and you'd be invested in that community. And on that block, you might have the doctor down the street, a construction worker next to you, somebody that works at the grocery store, police officer, which my dad was, all on one street, all shopping at the same store, all living that shared experience as a citizen in the town of Hollister. Now what happens is if you go off to college, you'll leave Hollister and you'll go to one of the major metropolitan areas. You'll meet a girl at college who's doing the same thing, and then you'll both move to Portland or LA or Seattle, and you will live in a community of people who went to the same level of college you went to, that shop at a grocery store, at Whole Foods, and you're completely now, what we have is almost two different worlds, and they do not understand each other. We saw that, of course, with the election of Trump, and a whole fraction of citizens who had no idea what had happened because they were so far removed from everyday experiences of Americans who don't come from that coastal elite culture. And where that occurs, I think that's going to lead to even greater separation and even more loneliness and even more despair, and almost two countries, which we're at the stage where I think we're almost there right now. So wherever possible, I like to see areas where people can come together and physically come together and engage in an activity. And if it's something that helps build the community, that's even better, like you're describing. But to get everybody from the different backgrounds and different political beliefs and get them together, working for a common goal that's going to help you locally at that local level. I think that's one of the best things we could possibly do for our country right now, because from what I've seen from the politicians and the media, corporate media especially, their goal is the opposite. I think they're invested in maintaining that separation and driving a wedge deeper and deeper between people of our nation. And it's headed in a dangerous direction. So for all those reasons and more, I think your mission statement is very important, because people need to get together and talk to each other. And the moment you do that, so much of the bullshit that we have, just starts to disappear. You realize how much of it was almost created by our media. So much of that anxiety, so much of that anger is manufactured by what we're clicking on the glass screen. And so the more that happens, the better. And yeah, good intentions aren't enough. Portland's a city filled with good intentions, and you can see what has happened to our city and the crime and the homeless drug encampments everywhere. Good intentions aren't enough. You also have to be right. You have to be right. And you have to measure what you're doing on results, not intentions.
Right.
And that's an easy conversation to have in person. It's an impossible conversation for us to now have in our media, because it's not allowed and they're so bifurcated. So for all those reasons and more, I think getting together in a community is really important.
Yeah, it's there's an old saying, it's hard to hate up close.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that people aren't going to have violent clashes in the street, because you probably see that frequently in Portland. It happens pretty much every week there. But when I say up close, I mean people who live around each other, who go to the same grocery stores and all this stuff, right? People who share the common experience. And it's, one of the other points about this statement about not allowing people to be taken advantage of or harmed. It's something I come back to, like when we talk about bullying, it's been a big topic the last 10 years or so. But when we talk about it, we spend a lot of time discussing how bullying is inappropriate and how there should be zero tolerance for it and stuff like that. But I really feel like we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about who the bully is and why they are that way, right? David is loud and obnoxious because he doesn't feel like he's getting the appropriate amount of attention, or he associates attention, which everybody wants, with his dad beating the shit out of him, for example. So that's how he gives attention to people, or there's all kinds of examples of this stuff. But when it comes to, like, especially in childhood bullying, like there's a reason. Like, you should, and I tell younger people this all the time, people in like middle and high school, yeah, you should step in and stop bullying. There's no question about that. But there's two things you shouldn't do. One, you shouldn't treat the victim like a victim, because that doesn't do them any favors. We've certainly seen evidence of that. The second thing you should do is, after you ensure that the victim of the bullying is okay, you need to go talk to this person before they become a fucking school shooter. You know what I mean? Like, what do you think? You have no idea what caused that person. Like, kids aren't just born and become pieces of shit by the time they're 10 years old for no reason. Something happened. And that kid maybe just wants somebody to talk to. And maybe you can do something, maybe you can't. But it's unacceptable not to try. And I'll say the same thing about the problems political problems in society, people seem to have chosen one side or the other. And, that's fine. You can have your political party, you can have your political beliefs, but it does seem like every time a major issue comes up, whether it's, poverty in inner cities, let's use that as an example, because people on the right disagree with how that symptom is being treated by the left, then they will, abandon any kind of support for finding solutions there. Like, well, I don't like that, so we're not going to do it. Man, that's just a really myopic and frankly, unempathetic way of looking at things. And it's also an unintelligent way of looking at things. It would be like just obviously your goal has to be to solve problems. I think that should be the first part. So you have to be able to entertain two ideas simultaneously in your head. One that like, hey, this solution that you're advertising right now is fucking stupid and it's not going to work and it's probably going to make things worse. But I still recognize that this is a problem. And this is the same thing I tell people about being involved in politics and in their own lives. If you don't want bad actors to come in and take advantage of your personal disadvantage or the disadvantages in your community, solve those problems yourself or get together with people in your community and solve them yourself. Because if you don't, somebody with an agenda is going to come in and solve that problem. They're going to do it in a way that probably makes it worse, right? And they're going to do it because they want more power and more money, typically. So those things I wrap together, like the idea of bullying and the idea of political bifurcation and all the just anger that people have for the quote unquote other side, when the reality is people don't like to watch others struggle. It's uncomfortable. Like if somebody trips and falls next to you, it's uncomfortable. You know what I mean? It's embarrassing, or you don't want to see people in pain, or, we've trained ourselves to step over homeless people because we have no solutions for that problem. That's not the answer, man. The answer is to find a way to be part of the solution to these problems. Otherwise, lesser men are going to turn you into subjects. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Regards bullying, I was bullied when I was a kid. When I moved from Hollister to a much bigger city closer to the Bay Area and started to get bullied. I write about this in the first chapter of my book. And the problem with the zero tolerance policy is there's many problems with that, but school systems in the public schools sometimes are the worst offenders when it comes to bullying, ignoring bullying or how they handle it. So the first thing I would tell anybody, whether they're a parent or a kid, is you have to fight back. Number one, that's just the first thing you have to do. It all begins with that. And what happens is what happened to me I turned on a dime from being kind of a bookish, shy, more effeminate kid to a violent juvenile delinquent with straight F's, and things could have really gone bad for me in multiple situations involving weapons and other things where I could easily have wound up in prison right now instead of where I was, just again through sheer fortune. But that can happen very quickly to any kid, especially when you're an adolescent and you're at that stage, if people aren't careful, if you're not paying attention. As far as the connection to that with the larger society, I agree. And, what I see going on, for example, we'll talk about here in Portland, the bullying that boys and bullying that girls experience are often very different. Whereas boys, you're going to be dealing with reactive aggression and being physically held or punched or something like that. And with girls, they'll often traffic in relational aggression where, you do what I say, or I'm going to isolate you from your friends. Nobody's going to be a friend with you. You're not going to get this. It's basically a threat of social isolation and shame if you don't comply. And that's what I see in a larger context with our society here in a place like Portland. If you don't put your BLM yard sign up, if you don't agree that, attacking the federal officers at the courthouse is the right thing to do, then we're going to put you in a forced kind of social isolation where you're going to be a pariah to the community. I can see it with the teachers in the school system who aren't happy with the way things are going on, but don't want to speak up. I can see it with our city council. I can see it with my citizens and the businesses that are putting up BLM signs in their window, which basically is "Please don't burn me down" signs. It's a plea not to be attacked, and it's all a form of bullying. And my response is the same. You have to, just like when you're a kid, you have to fight. You have to fight back. You have to stand up. You have to stand up for other people. And as soon as you do, and as soon as they do, I think they'll find out really quickly that those people who are engaged in that kind of relational violence are a minority. They're a tiny, fringe, crazy, mentally unstable minority. And the vast majority of citizens, whether they consider themselves on the left or the right politically, have a consensus that that's not okay, that people shouldn't be forced to believe or put up any kind of yard sign or have to nod our head in agreement that this organization that's basically exploiting the Black community and buying $1 million houses in all white neighborhoods is really the moral actor in the situation. And I hope that we see more of that. I hope we see more people standing up. It seems like we are. I'm not great at picking out social trends, but it seems like finally the dam has broken and more people are standing up and saying, no, I just don't agree with that. And if the elections coming up, not to sidetrack, but if the elections coming up do swing largely to the Republicans, which I hope they do, just because I think that's the only thing that'll get the message across the Democratic Party, I think then things will start to change as well, because the one thing I know that these people care about more than anything else is power. If they realize they're not going to get elected if they support policies that let violent offenders back out on the street over and over again, then they'll stop letting violent offenders back out on the street over and over again. But I think that's the only thing that's going to do it. So again, it's a question of getting people to stand up, say what you believe, stand up for your neighbors, stand up for yourself immediately, and don't let this form of intimidation happen locally in a school or as an adult or at your workplace or in the world of politics.
100%. Yeah, that's great. I agree with all of that. And it's about the absence of leadership. You know, that's really what we're dealing with right now. And these are the very obvious and inevitable results of a lack of leadership is what we're seeing in society right now. But the good news is, and I tell people every time I bring this subject up, I tell people it sounds daunting and maybe it's embarrassing because we all played a role in letting it get to this point. But the good news is that we're the ones that can solve it. There's nobody, the idea that there's nobody coming to save you may seem intimidating, but what it does is put the power in your hands to change your own life. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we get out of here?
No, I appreciate you having me on. If people are interested in our work, they can go to straightblastgym.com, see our locations around the world. Have a book coming out called The Gift of Violence. It should be out in winter this year. And you can look me up, Matt Thornton. And yeah, that's the best way to get in touch with me.
Absolutely. All right, you guys go check out all the media he does. Look forward for the book. We'll have you back on when it comes out to discuss some of those tenets as well. I appreciate you coming today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. And I appreciate all of you listening. This has been Citizen.